Welcome to an audiobook entitled Parish Management and Operations, The Buck Stops Here, narrated by Catholic author Michael Brinda. We hope you enjoy the segment and find it useful in your ministerial work.
Chapter 73, The Hidden Benefit, Loyalty. In addition to the above-mentioned benefits of hiring a bright person who is always willing to take direction, and training this person to do the job within the culture you are establishing or have established, and in the manner you want the job done, there is another benefit to this method of hiring: employee loyalty. Let me explain this benefit as follows. Given the choice between hiring a bright person who is willing to take direction but needs training, or hiring somebody with prior experience and relying on this prior experience to guide this person to do the job in a superior manner, 10 times out of 10, I will hire the bright person who is willing to take direction over the person who has prior experience, and then I will provide them the necessary training. Why? In addition to the reasons already spelled out above, it has been my experience that when you hire someone who has proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt during the interview that he or she is bright and willing to take direction, this person is basically saying to you, I can do this job. I know I can do this job. Please, just give me a chance and let me show you, because other people will not even give me the courtesy of an interview due to the lack of my prior experience. Now, the sad truth is most employers follow conventional thinking here and would not even bother interviewing this applicant because their misguided hiring parameters overweigh and over-prioritize prior work experience or academic degree requirements when no degree is necessarily required. This fact inevitably results in bright people who are willing to take direction, the precise profile you want to hire and build into A players, being weeded out of your applicant pool before they are ever given an opportunity to interview for a job they would become supremely qualified to perform. Now, imagine how many rejection letters and emails this profile of job applicant has received prior to receiving your call to come in for an interview. Further, imagine the internal amazement that your line of interviewing questioning seems to pursue, trying to determine if they are bright, agile thinkers and if they are truly willing to take direction, instead of quickly being shown the door, never being given a fair chance to show their intellect and willingness to take direction simply because they lack the perceived, subjective, requisite number of prior years' experience somebody arbitrarily deemed necessary. Now, imagine how such a person feels when he or she is not only given a complete interview, but is actually offered the job. I am here to tell you such people are generally extremely loyal to the person and organization that gave them this opportunity, and they do all within their power to live daily the two characteristics you stressed during your interview: to demonstrate their keen intellect and to all the time and every time accept direction such that they can perform their job under the correct culture and in the manner they were trained to do. As such, we come full circle back to the key hiring points. You do not want people with prior experience unless they are also bright and always willing to take direction, a nearly impossible trio of factors to find singing in harmony in any applicant. Therefore, if any one of these factors cannot be found in applicants, let it be the prior experience ingredient. Do not fall into the trap of demanding excessive prior experience for PMO positions. Resolve here and now that you know your duty as a PMO administrator always includes new hire indoctrination into the correct PMO culture, which includes a time investment in training the new hire on how to do the job the way you want the job done. You can delegate all or a part of these tasks depending upon the state of PMO where you are. Nevertheless, delegation or no delegation, the PMO accepts the responsibility of building new hire A-player employees for the reward of hiring loyal employees who are supremely willing and able to do their job if only their boss would tell them what to do, when to do it, and how they want it done. No PMO administrator need ask for more than this attitude from any employee or volunteer. Chapter 74, On Firing. There are 5 primary areas of consideration to firing a PMO employee, listed in no particular order. Number 1, the administrative process. Number 2, potential legal ramifications. Number 3, the internal impact on PMO. Number 4, the impact on the employee. And number 5, the impact on the parish. The administrative process considerations simply have to do with mechanically following the policies and paperwork procedures for termination of an employee as set forth by the Parish Employee Handbook. The Parish Employee Handbook reflects all such policies and paperwork procedures of your diocese as further reviewed and improved by the diocese law firm specializing in the legalities of personnel matters. If your parish does not have an employee handbook, or if your employee handbook does not contain information on the procedures your diocese requires you follow for terminating an employee, you would be wise to immediately contact the chief administrative officer or vicar for clergy in your diocese before taking any action. Thus, concerning the science of firing, not the art, it can be summarized in 3 steps. Step 1, locate the employee handbook for your diocese. Step 2, read it. Step 3, follow what it says to the letter. From the above points, you can conclude that after you have decided to terminate the employment of someone, the administrative process to terminate an employee is essentially mechanical, a series of approved and documented procedural steps that are to be followed by the PMO administrator as outlined and prescribed in the Parish Employee Handbook. This process may be supplemented in your parish with an additional de facto policy from only the pastor does the firing to the highly lamentable fire? We don't fire anybody here. More on this point below. Regardless, the precise process for terminating any employee varies according to the employment and labor laws of each state. But fundamentally, informing an employee he or she has been fired is usually the culmination of a lengthy administrative process of attempting, always in love and charity, to help the employee improve his or her performance via a written personal improvement plan, plus documenting and recording the employee's progress or failures over a period of time, usually measured in months, not weeks or days, unless there is an extremely grave reason to do so. In terms of the legal ramifications of firing an employee, there is no legal advice offered here. It is beyond the scope of this book to offer any legal advice. All such legal advice must come from a competent attorney specializing in the employment and labor laws of your state. What can be said is that the PMO administrator must follow the labor laws as presented by all the written policies and procedures regarding employee termination, especially in the area of written documentation of below-standard employee performance. Furthermore, All such documentation regarding poor employee performance must not only exist in the employee's file, it must also reconcile with other pertinent factors that also comment on employee performance. For example, you cannot on the one hand claim poor employee performance and on the other hand have the same employee's employment documentation show a history of praise in job performance reviews or a history of pay increases. Notwithstanding any egregious violation, in order to terminate an employee, your subjective job performance commentary must correlate with the documented historical reality you are holding in your hand, and until it does, you most likely should do nothing. If such accurate commentary and documentation does not exist in the file, and why that might be so will be addressed below, you have two options. Number one, you must start to build an employee file that reflects current job performance reality before any termination action can be considered. Thus, for all intents and purposes, no matter the duration of employment, an old hire is essentially rendered into a new hire when the employee file historical documentation is inaccurate, incomplete, or empty. Or, number two, after consulting with the pastor, labor attorney, and all other necessary parties to the decision, you terminate the employee regardless of what the employee's file contains. You choose this course of action because in your judgment, no matter how much further training is provided, this employee will not improve, and he or she is also extremely detrimental to PMO. Employee termination thus becomes akin to a moral imperative, as to delay dismissing this employee for the additional months necessary to document poor performance is so grossly to fail to serve the souls we have been called to serve that no further delay can be justified. Clearly, any previous written personnel file entries, even perfunctorily praising an employee's job performance or a history of pay raises, would not correlate well to your current observations of incompetent job performance. Now, one might legitimately wonder, but how is it possible to document satisfaction with an employee's job performance, give pay raises, bonuses, etc., while at the same time actually being dissatisfied with his or her job performance? Perhaps as hard as it is for you to accept, and it is certainly sad to accept, the answer is simple. The PMO administrator or administrators, prior to your arrival, chose the more selfish path of least resistance. No matter what your eyes tell you about employee performance, avoid confrontation at all costs. Just go along to get along and don't make waves. For example, upon your arrival, you discover a woefully incompetent PMO employee, but when you open his personnel file, assuming there even is a personnel file to open, curiously you find a steady documented history of annual praise and salary increases for this employee. Or you find nothing per se written about the job performance in the file at all, except a documented steady history of pay raises and Christmas bonuses, which is de facto the same thing as documenting what? Superior employee performance. Oh, that's not good. Further note, the status of church does not mean the employment and labor laws of your state have been suspended or waived. You are an employer, and barring any court ruling to the contrary, you are subject to the same labor laws as any other employer. Just because you operate as a church does not grant you the license to operate as you wish, nor does it grant you immunity from employee litigation. In the absence of a complete and properly annotated employee file, guess what you have? Historical employee performance has been pretty much whatever the employee claims it has been in all his or her months or years of employment. Oh, memo to self. The parish is an employer and must follow all the best practices and rules of employment, just like any other employer. Thus, when the personnel file is blank, much less filled with praise and pay increases, no matter what the actual truth may be, the benefit of the doubt in any legal contest will most likely flow to the employee, not the employer. In other words, unless you have a written file, whatever the employee claims about his or her past job performance will be presumed as fact by those who hold your fate in their hands. Oh, that's not good. This may not be fair, but this is the reality. So, what if the employee file is empty or incomplete, and you cannot show documentation to the contrary of whatever the employee is claiming? Always speak with your labor law attorney about the circumstances before taking any action. Again, your predecessor or predecessors chose to take the path of least resistance. They knew, as you must now know, that confronting a poorly performing employee is the opposite of fun. It is, in my opinion, the worst part of any managerial job. Nobody likes this aspect of the job. Such conversations can spiral down into brutally confrontational work, something that is easily anticipated and is precisely the reason people ignore doing their duty in this regard. Expect to discover this scenario of poor employee job performance hiding behind either the soaring language of false praise, perhaps perfunctory boilerplate language but nevertheless soaring, and wage increases to match, or no comments in the employee file at all. This is especially common when the PMO culture has been corrupted by the misplaced notion of "we are all family here," a phrase used to avoid, cover, mask, ignore, or hide proactively addressing poor to abysmal employee performance. Given this potential for grief, why bother with firing someone? Consider for a moment that others, including perhaps your boss, may not see what you see or understand what you understand about the negative ripple of consequences of poor employee or volunteer performance. Those that work with you each day may make a misguided, but no less real, snap judgment about your actions, conjuring villain imagery while using words to describe you such as atrocious, harsh, mean, not Christ-like, stupid, uncharitable. And those are just the words we can talk about. Ouch. The reality? We need and we have but one role model here, and his name is Jesus. Matthew 21, verse 12. Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all those engaged in selling and buying there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. End quote. Rather than confront a person with the news that he or she is performing poorly, which of course you now realize shifts the burden of training the employee away from the employee and onto the PMO administrator, your predecessor just looked the other way and swept employee poor performance under the rug. That is, if they were even capable in the first place of correctly defining and distinguishing between good and poor employee performance. Why? It is so much easier in most cases to ignore poor employee performance to the detriment of those we are called to serve in PMO and just allow poor performance to slide on by day after day after day. Pretty soon, poor performance becomes normalized within the culture. Indeed, poor performance simply becomes the new workplace normal, the enshrined, accepted, and transparent PMO performance standard. Upon your arrival, it will not take long for you to notice if this is your current inherited culture. Further note, allowing poor employee job performance to continue unchecked, which is to say you fail to terminate an employee who should be terminated, is an internal cancer that will not only spread, it will absolutely defeat all your efforts to create and install a proper PMO culture. Wow, that point is worthy of some serious reflection. Do not even bother trying to install the correct PMO culture if you are going to even one time look the other way at current poor employee performance. So long as you knowingly allow a single poorly performing employee to remain employed, you have no chance of installing the correct PMO culture. Once you go down the road of turning a blind eye to poor employee performance under such broken rubrics as "we are all family here," or "we are all friends here," or "I'm too busy to deal with this problem," your culture is doomed, and so is any chance at delivering superior PMO performance to those we are called to serve. It must also be noted that when chronically poorly performing PMO employee is allowed to remain employed, such employees not only fail to properly serve parishioners and the community at large, but they unwittingly are poorly serving themselves and their own careers at personal development. Simply stated, such employees and their own careers and personal development are stymied. Look, when the job and the employee in the job are not a match, they're not working where they belong, disingenuous allusions to "we are all family here" and similar misplaced excuse-enabling imagery conveniently allows the boss, who is clearly wearing the wrong hat at this moment, to overlook chronically poor performance in the name of hollow-ringing family and friendship bromides. This is akin to putting lipstick on a donkey. The donkey is still a donkey and will always remain a donkey, not the racehorse role you are trying to miscast the donkey into. In reality, casting an employee as a friend is simply hiding behind a label that has no place in this specific discussion. It is actually deploying a well-accepted canard the PMO administrator can use to avoid doing his or her duty. "They're my friends. They've been here for many years. I can't fire my friends." Such claims are actually detrimental to the career development of employees. When the PMO administrator allows poorly performing employees to remain where they are, that is in fact the least loving and charitable response to the situation. How so? A poorly performing employee cannot be employed where God may desire him or her to be if poor performance on the current job is chronically falsely rewarded with unearned praise, unwarranted pay increases, and unearned continued employment. Who are you to say you are not acting as God's agent when you speak the bona fide truth to an employee about his or her job performance? Who are you to say that you are not doing the work of the Holy Spirit when you recognize a square peg, round hole, employee-employer job mismatch? How do you know you are not defeating God's plan for someone when you eschew doing your duty to terminate an employee? Why do you believe that terminating an employee is always and necessarily a bad outcome for the employee? Do you know this employee's future? No, you do not. I know many a prison inmate who will tell you that being sent to prison is, as bad as maximum security prison is, the only reason they are still alive today. Translation: sometimes things are not as bad as they appear, or even what they appear to be. So who is to say who is the villain and who is the hero here? When the PMO administrator allows poorly performing employees to remain where they are, that just might be the least loving and least charitable response to the situation for everyone. Chapter 75. Although it is sometimes necessary to terminate an employee, clearly note there is no connection between the fact an employee must be terminated and that the manner and method of the termination by definition must be harsh, blunt, or accomplished without compassion. There is no such connection. Yet this is somehow often assumed simply because this topic is termination of employment, a loaded word describing an action that admittedly carries some rather harsh imagery and overtones. Notwithstanding how the employee may react when given news of his or her dismissal, from the PMO administrator's perspective, the process of terminating an employee is always to be done with Christian love and emotional concern for the well-being of the employee or volunteer. No rational person takes joy in terminating an employee, but at the end of the day, the PMO administrator cannot allow a poorly performing employee to remain in a job that is clearly not a fit and not working for either the employee or the employer. However, what is often overlooked is this notion that dismissing an employee is always a one-sided proposition that implicitly benefits the employer and explicitly hurts the employee. This is not true. We can actually be working with God, and certainly should be, when we are dismissing an employee, because unless and until you dismiss individuals who clearly are not a fit where they are, they may never grow into what they could be, where they should be, doing whatever it is that they should be doing. However, more often than not, understandably, the person who is the center of attention does not see this perspective when he or she is being dismissed. But this is especially true after being misled either by silence, being ignored, or receiving unwarranted praise from the previous PMO administrator or administrators. The employee's surprise when confronted with job performance reality is often understandable and is to be expected. Even after you give the proper job performance warnings and corrective training as called for by your employee handbook, ultimately, how would you feel? How would you react to being fired after being told in many prior years by your prior boss that you have been doing a fine job, or even better than a fine job, and you have the historical pay raises to support your belief? This is the grief we sow when we make excuses instead of doing our PMO administrator job in personnel management as proactively as we should. When we serve our time in a parish, but deliberately ignore the obvious poor employee and volunteer performances, when we kick this problem down the road and pass the buck to the next PMO administrator, we are planting the seeds of a broken culture, and we are not serving the parish, the employee, or the church. To assist you, here are 10 general insights on firing. Number 1, in conversation, always be yourself. Number 2, stay calm no matter what happens. Number 3, do all your homework first. Number 4, get to the point. Number 5, you are not compelled to answer all questions. In this context, the less you say, the better. Why? Litigation must be assumed. Number 6, seek approval from all necessary authorities before taking any action. Number 7, Do not be surprised at the amount or type of fallout from an employee termination, both within PMO and the parish at large. Some employees may have connections you are not even aware of. Number 8, do not be shy about using termination as a culture-building lesson. Number 9, always debrief yourself. You must understand why any termination was not preventable. Number 10, be alert and aware for terminated employees who are so disgruntled they might hurt themselves or others. Here's the bottom line. It is immoral to ignore doing your duty when we know our duty, simply because we are facing an uncomfortable task we would rather not perform. No rational person enjoys terminating an employee, and we are not asking the PMO administrator to enjoy this task. Just do your duty or vacate the PMO administrator position for someone who will.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.